At 23 years old, Carlos Alcaraz has already built a legacy that most professional tennis players couldn't touch in 3 lifetimes. 7 Grand Slam titles, a career Grand Slam completed before most players even figure out how to handle pressure, and a spot at the very peak of the sport. On paper, he is unstoppable, but inside the locker room, behind closed doors, and within the small circle that manages his career, a very different story has been unfolding. For months, tennis fans had begun to suspect that something was off. The explosive movement, the effortless joy, and the unbreakable physical resilience that defined his rise were suddenly being tested by something far more complicated than an opponent across the net. The subtle shifts in his schedule, the prolonged absences from major tournaments, and the intense physical demands of the modern ATP Tour were slowly forcing a reckoning. Then came the decision, a choice about his body, his team, and his immediate future that sent immediate shockwaves through the tennis world. Was this the choice of a mature champion taking ultimate control over his career, or the beginning of a dangerous gamble that could alter the trajectory of his entire prime? To understand how Alcaraz arrived at this crossroads, you have to look at the unsustainable pace he set for himself. Since breaking onto the tour as a teenager, Carlos wasn't just playing tennis, he was physically overwhelming it. His game relied on explosive acceleration, slide receptions on hard courts, and a heavy, brutal forehand. It was a style built for immediate world domination, but one that demanded a terrifying physical tax from his body. By early spring, the toll became undeniable. A persistent right wrist injury, tenosynovitis, an inflammation of the tendon sheath, forced him to pull out of the Barcelona Open after just 1 match. What was initially presented as a precautionary break quickly morphed into something far more serious. One by one, the red brick dirt of Roland Garros and the pristine grass of Wimbledon vanished from his calendar. For over 4 months, more than 114 consecutive days, the world's most exciting player was reduced to a spectator, forced to watch from the sidelines as his chief rivals capitalized on his absence. The tension wasn't just about missing tournaments, it was about the fundamental clash of philosophies inside his camp. For years, his team had operated with a single, uncompromising rule. When Carlos plays, he plays at 100% intensity. There was no middle ground, no coasting through early rounds, and no holding back on the court. But as week after week of rehabilitation passed without a competitive match, that exact philosophy began to look like a double-edged sword. Trainers and medical experts were quietly raising the alarm. If Alcaraz returned to the tour attempting to hit every forehand at maximum violence, his wrist simply wouldn't hold up. Yet asking a natural thoroughbred to race at 55% intensity went against everything that made him a champion in the first place. Something had to give. The pressure was mounting, the calendar was running out, and a critical choice was looming right over the horizon. When news first broke that Carlos Alcaraz had parted ways with longtime mentor Juan Carlos Ferrero, just before his historic 2026 campaign, many assumed it was a simple, professional evolution. After all, Ferrero was the architect who took a raw, fiery teenager from El Palmar and turned him into the youngest player in history to complete a career Grand Slam. Under Samuel Lopez, Alcaraz immediately captured the Australian Open in January, proving that he could win at the highest level without Ferrero in his player box. But as spring turned to summer and the physical toll mounted, the underlying reality began to emerge. The split wasn't about tactics. It was about management, workload, and preservation. Ferrero had been the strict, uncompromising anchor who knew when to rein in Carlos's instincts. When Alcaraz wanted to sprint after every lost cause or hit every forehand at maximum velocity, Ferrero was the voice demanding patience. Without that rigid counterweight, the aggressive style that won Melbourne quickly ran into a brutal physical wall. By the time the clay court swing arrived, the warning signs were flashing red. The right wrist injury in Barcelona wasn't an isolated accident. It was the accumulation of months spent playing at absolute maximum intensity without proper structural load management. Pulling out of Roland Garros and Wimbledon wasn't just a blow to his ranking points. It was a direct challenge to his identity. For the first time in his career, Alcaraz was forced to face the harsh reality that his body is not indestructible. Now, with the US Open looming on the calendar, the stakes have escalated from a temporary injury timeout to a defining career dilemma. Returning to Flushing Meadows to defend his title means making a fundamental compromise. Can Carlos Alcaraz accept playing at 80% capacity to protect his wrist, or will the competitive pride that made him a 7-time Grand Slam champion force him into a risk he simply can't afford? Because when you strip away the ranking points, the endorsement deals, and the media spectacle, this decision reveals a far deeper truth about where Carlos Alcaraz stands in his development as a man and a champion. Earlier in his career, Alcaraz relied on an instinctual, almost careless freedom. He hit absurd drop shots on break points, chased down impossible baseline lobs, and treated every center court match like a neighborhood playground pickup game. It was thrilling, magnetic, and undeniably effective. But that era of pure innocence is officially over. At 23, Alcaraz is confronting the harsh realities of longevity. The Big Three, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, didn't reach double-digit Grand Slams simply because they were extraordinarily talented. They did it because they mastered the unglamorous art of self-preservation. They learned when to pull back, when to skip a tournament, and when to adapt their style of play to protect their bodies for the battles that truly mattered. For Carlos, the decision to step away for 4 long months and potentially forfeit his US Open crown is his first real test in that exact discipline. It is the moment where the reckless enthusiasm of youth gives way to the calculated strategy of a career built for the long haul. Leaving the tour when you are at the top of your power is painful. Watching Jannik stack up titles in your absence is agonizing. Yet, learning to endure that pain without rushing back prematurely might just be the most important lesson Alcaraz ever learns. Look at what happened just this past week. While the rest of the tour was grinding through the heat of the Cincinnati Masters, Alcaraz was in Murcia, training on private practice courts. Beside him wasn't a standard sparring partner, but Holger Rune, another brilliant young star battling his own grueling road back from injury. The footage that leaked from those sessions sent the tennis world into a frenzy. Alcaraz was uncorking full-power serves and ripping forehands with recognizable violent speed. To the untrained eye, it looked like a triumphant return. The compression wrap around his right forearm was the only visible sign of a 4-month nightmare. But inside professional tennis circles, the reaction was far more cautious. Former world number 4 Greg Rusedski voiced what many experts were whispering privately, warning that stepping straight into a best-of-5 Grand Slam after more than 100 days without competitive match play is an immense physical gamble. Practice intensity is one thing. Surviving 7 grueling 5-set battles against the world's best under the scorching New York sun is a completely different monster. And here is the counter-argument that Alcaraz and his team have to consider. If he steps onto Arthur Ashe Stadium at anything less than full strength, he risks more than just an early round exit. He risks re-aggravating the inflamed tendon sheath in his wrist, potentially turning a seasonal setback into a career-altering chronic issue. Yet, sitting out the US Open means forfeiting his 2000 defending champion ranking points, dropping behind Alexander Zverev to world number 3, and watching Jannik extend his dominance at the top of the ATP rankings completely unchallenged. It is the ultimate razor's edge: sacrifice short-term glory to protect the future, or roll the dice on his own raw genius. So maybe the real question isn't whether Carlos Alcaraz was forced to step away, or whether he chose to step away. The real question is whether the player who once needed a full-throttle attack to conquer the world is now ready to master the patience required to stay on top. His 4-month absence, his grueling rehabilitation, and his deliberate return to match intensity haven't just been about saving his wrist. They have been about securing the next decade of his career. He hasn't proven that he can win without taking risks. He has proven something far more important, that he values his future enough to take control of his own timeline. The true verdict of this decision won't be written in a single practice session or a single press conference. It will be delivered under the lights of Flushing Meadows, when the pressure is at its absolute peak, the crowd is roaring, and his body is pushed to the absolute limit. Will he return as the same reckless, thrilling phenomenon who took the tennis world by storm, or as a wiser, more lethal champion built to endure? Was taking a 4-month break to protect his wrist a brilliant long-term career strategy, or an unnecessary gamble that opened the door for Sinner and Zverev? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.